excited to be here. Excited to get to share a little bit more about what we're doing and how we got here. At Audius, we launched a product about 6 months ago, and we've been really fortunate to get a lot of usage during that time. And I thought I'd open up our playbook a little bit here for other folks to hear more about how we got here. This is always the question I get, right? Which is like, how did so many people come to use this thing? How did this happen, right? And it's actually really simple and really easy. And I think there's a lot of things that we can take from the way that like traditional centralized companies build and ship products, right? But just to give you a quick overview of what we are and what we actually do, Audius is a decentralized audio hosting and streaming protocol. Think like a decentralized SoundCloud. We help artists connect directly with fans and distribute anything they want in a censorship-resistant way. So that means nobody can interfere with your ability to distribute content, have an account be available, have that available around the world, etc. Really trying to give power and freedom back to content creators who've been disenfranchised elsewhere for so long. This is just a very quick high-level overview of the music industry. The important thing to note here is that artists are just this tiny segment of the pie. If you look at how much value is getting distributed out in the music industry, $42 billion is nothing to sneeze at, right? But it's crazy that the people who are actually creating the value here are capturing so little of it. And we just felt like they'd been taken for granted for way too long. So that was what we built Audius to help solve. So far, it's been really good. We're seeing about 200,000 people a month come on and use the product, as you saw in the clickbaity title at the beginning. About 20,000 of those are artists. We've seen 67,000 tracks or so get uploaded. Somewhere. All of this is public, by the way, if any of you wanted to go look at kind of our usage and whatnot, because this is being community operated and is fully open source. And we've seen 830,000 transactions get processed on chain via the Audius contracts. So we've been very, very fortunate to get to work with a lot of big names in electronic music. This was what helped kickstart our growth early on. But ultimately, what really let us get this kernel of kind of value prop out there in the world and kind of self-propagating, where at this point, we don't spend any money on marketing or distribution of any kind. It's all kind of word of mouth. Was thinking about I think the most important thing and what kind of frustrates me a lot in crypto is seeing people not like clearly understanding, distilling and pitching like why people want the thing that they're building. And I think this is like step zero of the playbook, right? I'm going to assume that you already are working on something that's like, that people actually care about. But I think this is the really important thing I wanted to kind of underscore on this point. Like, decentralization is not a value prop. This is not a reason to use something. The benefits of things like community ownership, decentralization, etc., really come in actually quite a bit after the launch and early growth of the product, right? I don't think anyone is going to be using a decentralized Facebook today if no one else is using it, right? The network effect is what creates value in a product like that, not the decentralization. However, decentralization can matter further down the road. In our case, decentralization really did matter upfront, because we were telling artists, like, you've been kicked off of all these other platforms. I mean, literally all these folks have faced censorship. You might not be aware of it, but a large portion of the catalog that they'll go play live, they aren't able to distribute anywhere online. So we could just go to them with the very clear value prop of put stuff here that has that can't be taken away, right? No one can take this away from you. And that's what people got really excited about. But assuming you sort of start with that, the path to getting usage is like pretty deterministic, and it's really no different in crypto from the way that you would kind of think about launching and growing a product in like traditional centralized product land, right? We the framework we kind of use to think about how we shepherd a user through their interactions with Audius and through that product journey are really the kind of three phases that we took from all of the sort of centralized product learnings around discovery, acquisition, and retention. Basically, number one is, how do people find out about your product? Like, how do they first hear about it, whether it's word of mouth or marketing materials or whatever? That's discovery. Acquisition is, how do you convert that knowledge that someone has of your product into like some first actual interaction with it? That is, in our case, playing a track is kind of the sort of discrete unit of interaction that we look at in this phase. And then retention. How do you convert that first interaction into some continuous use over time, or some sort of engagement over time, right? One of the really cool things about crypto here, and this is where things diverge a bit from the old traditional wisdom of product building, is that there's kind of this fourth phase, which is, right, like Audius is community operated, fully decentralized. Content is being hosted by this community of node operators, as is the indexing of that content, etc. There, you can kind of, at a certain stage of user progression, you now have the new sort of opportunity to bring users into the actual operation of the protocol, and that's what this is meant to encompass. So I'm just going to kind of talk through, I guess, how we thought through these four phases, what we try to do at each of them, and I would posit it, if you apply the same framework to this, right? If you have the thing that people want, you can deterministically take that thing people want to a meaningful amount of usage in not very much time, right? So yeah, I mean, on the discovery front, right? This is, as I mentioned, it's how do people hear about your product? In Audius's case, there are two primary ways. One is direct marketing materials from the company. That is, us tweeting out things, sharing like, why does this matter? Why should you care about it? That kind of thing. Pretty simple, right? And I think the really important thing to note here for crypto, this is where most people start to say, hey, we're decentralized, we're built on this super cool tech stack. Like, I don't think most users care about that. What they do care about is, what can this do to me today that other things cannot, right? So you see, in the way that we sort of market and talk about Audius, we really talk about the benefits that decentralization provides. That is, that second bullet point, becoming fully open source, community operated, and no frivolous takedowns or account bans. These are kind of the benefits that we're able to provide by being decentralized, that no other centralized platform can. But people don't care about why we can do that. They just care that can be done, right? And I think that distinction is a really important one, and that's what's allowed us to kind of like reduce the cognitive burden that someone has to take on to understand what this thing is, right? From most of our users' perspective, the vast majority, we're just a new music streaming platform, right? We just have slightly different characteristics from others, and where those characteristics matter are what allow us to kind of get exclusive content, which drives usage, etc. So path number two, though, the very frequent one, probably where the majority of our usage has come from so far, is by interacting with content. So in this case, Graves, one of our bigger artists on Audius, uploaded a set, tweeted it out. It's got shared and reshared and etc. So for a lot of users, they just open a link to a track on Audius and start playing it, and then they're like, oh, okay, I'm just listening to my music, and that's their first like interaction with us, right? That's how they first hear about us. So in this latter case, discovery almost immediately turns into kind of acquisition, right? That is, if you click on the the set, you actually start to play the music, right? It's pretty simple, right? And I think the most important like lesson that we had from here that I would hope others can benefit from is that minimizing friction to first value demonstration is really the most important thing that you can optimize for in optimizing for this phase. So in Audius, anyone can play a track. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to set up your MetaMask and write down your seed passphrase and stick it in a safe deposit box. You can just click it and start playing, right? Now, if you want to sign up and there are certain actions that you cannot do without being signed up, right? You can see in this screenshot, I reposted this track. That action wouldn't really make sense, outside of the context of an account, but that's the moment where you prompt someone to create an account or engage with you in that way. The most important thing you can do in that upfront interaction is provide value with no friction and get people hooked into understanding why this is interesting before you try to put friction on them. And I think that a lot of this does, I know there's this philosophical argument that often wages in the crypto community, right, on how upfront with users should we be that a product is decentralized? How much should we be beating them upside the head with the fact that this is different, right? This is a different paradigm. We've taken the very strong stance that to the extent absolutely possible, you should be able to provide the benefits of decentralization to your users without having to force them to retrain their product interaction models, right? So I think the kind of early interaction paradigms created and norms created by things like MetaMask and whatnot were great for certain use cases, right? If you're moving large amounts of money into and out of a DeFi protocol, you should probably get prompted before you send $1 million or whatever it is. But I think what frustrates me a lot in this space is I see people treating kind of the equivalent of the pocket change in your pocket the same way they treat your bank account, right? And that's not the way you behave with money in the outside world. I mean, even the level of protection most people would apply to their Venmo account is well out of spec with the amount of value that account can potentially draw from, right? When you think about the bank account that it's connected to. But regardless, I think there is a spectrum there, right? And there's a way to provide these benefits. So unfortunately, don't have time to get into that too much here today. But I would encourage you all to try out Audius, and you can actually see this in practice, right? We have a non-custodial wallet solution that, to the end user, looks like a normal username and password that they sign up for, and that's actually open source too. If anyone's curious to play around with it, just hit me up after this. But to get back to what I mentioned earlier, the time you prompt people for friction is when you have to, right? In this case, it was clicking a repost button if you're signed out will take you to a sign up page and prompt you to say, hey, you can't do that without an account, right? This is really important though, because the account and sign up with a service more generally is what gets you your communication channel with the user, right? Now you can keep your product top of mind, you can send notifications, you can all of these things, right? And it's important to provide value as part of that. If you go overboard with communication, users are going to not be happy with that. But I think this, the sign up step is very key for converting one-time use here into long-term engaged use over time. So, pretty straightforward, kind of the same paradigms and patterns that you would see in traditional product building. Here's where things get really interesting in crypto though. And this is where the power of a decentralized product can so fundamentally change the relationship a user has with a service, right? Because the whole point of a service like Audius or many others that many other folks speaking here, for example, are able to provide to users is that they actually can own and control part of this greater thing, right? And to create on ramps and avenues for your users to basically earn their way into a position of operation in the protocol, basically, right? I don't know that this is necessarily the right term for this phase, but it was kind of the internally at Audius what we've been kicking around. It's kind of like how do you upgrade usage into actively contributing beyond the level of just uploading content in Audius, right? That is running a service, integrating the protocol elsewhere, things like that. So to the extent we can in the product experience, we've gone to great lengths to make this easy, right? So empowering folks like Dancing Astronaut, who's one of the bigger dance music blogs, to be able to curate their own playlist of cool stuff that they're seeing in Audius and be able to host that on their site, right? And further down the road, enabling folks who integrate this music listening and music unlocking protocol into other experiences to actually capture some of the revenue that they're indirectly able to create there, right? So this is we're in the earliest phases of this of working on this area within Audius. I think there's a lot more work to do there, but I think the way we tried to go through this was sort of work on each phase successively, because earlier phases unlock later phases, right? If no one discovers you can't retain anyone because there's no one there in the first place, right? But you can kind of think about this in sequence. And if you do so, this is pretty deterministic. I think if you've got a use case that people actually care about, it just becomes a matter of putting it in front of the right people and empowering them with the right information at the right time to be able to, activate in a way that is beneficial both to them as the user and to the protocol in the form of increased usage. So yeah, I'm excited I got to share some of this playbook with everyone here. I'd love to hear any feedback or thoughts people have. Feel free to reach out. But some quick updates, on our project. The next big milestone for us is our mainnet launch. So right now, all of the folks operating nodes in the community are doing so in a testnet capacity. Mainnet will mean both real value changing hands in that process, but also kind of a level of robustness in the protocol that hasn't existed up until today. You can try it out. We have mobile apps out in the iOS and Android app stores. Apple featured us because this is one of the few crypto apps that doesn't beat users upside the head with the fact that this is crypto based, which was really cool to see. Apple, I think, has gotten a bad rap in our community for controlling and otherwise excluding products from their distribution. But I think, my hot take here is I think, a lot of that was for good reason. If someone is, distributing an app that's hard to use and is not within the human interface guidelines of what Apple provides, that's a problem, right? So yeah, learn more, run a node, check the project out. Feel free to reach out to me. But thank you all for letting me share, and I hope we'll see more crypto projects get usage, because I think that's what this space needs most. Thanks so much. Bye.